Bird Sanicki, and I'm a manager at Google's Open Source Programs Office. And I'm so excited that you're here to learn about being a leader in open source. And I just want to thank you for making time for this important topic, because when we have more leaders in our open source projects, they become healthier and we all end up making a greater impact together. So today I'm going to cover what is leadership and how can we strengthen our leadership skills. And I'm going to provide some tips that you can start using today to be the leader that you need in open source. So hopefully that sounds great. And why don't we get started with a story that does a pretty good job illustrating what leadership looks like in open source. A few years ago, I was working on a project where we wanted to improve the contributor experience. And we were interviewing all kinds of contributors to get their history and what worked and what didn't work. And one story always comes to mind. It's a common story. This person wanted to contribute, make their first contribution to the project. And they went to the forums, they went to the issue queues, and they found that it was a very intimidating process. People were a little aggressive in these different channels, and they were talking at a higher level than what a newcomer might be used to. And so this person just did not know how to engage and didn't feel comfortable starting the process for contributing. And unfortunately, they waited an entire year before they made their first commit, which is really unfortunate. But they realized the situation they were in, they had a goal, and they took the right steps to move forward. They reached out to a mentor and asked this volunteer if they would provide help. And of course, this volunteer did a great job, and this contributor made their first commit. And because of a learning mindset, they contributed again and again and again. And today, this contributor is one of the top contributors for this project, which just is amazing. But it's also just a real shame, because this project was losing a lot because of these experiences that were happening in these forums. I mean, with just this contributor alone, they lost 400 commits a year. And then how many contributors did they lose because people just couldn't break through the way this one contributor did? And the answer is just too many. And it doesn't have to be this way. And people don't want it to be this way. It's just that often many people step up to help in open source, as you do, but they don't realize they're actually stepping into leadership roles. And it's not identified that way. And it's not clear how to conduct yourself when you're in these leadership roles. And it can start to get a little messy and confusing for everyone. And that's why I like to provide this kind of training, so people are more self-aware of how to conduct themselves, how to lead others, how to get things done in a healthy way within open source. And so I'd love to just use the story to kind of unpack what leadership is, because there's a lot of leadership stories in here. So the first one is, who were the leaders in this story? And the answer is the forum moderator, the people working in the issue queues. They were helping, but they were also leading. They had great influence over the project and what was happening in these channels. The other leader was the mentor, a volunteer who gave up time and helped this person with achieving their goal. The other person who was a leader, which might be a little surprising, is the contributor, because they had to lead themselves to get a positive outcome and to achieve a goal. And so I'm going to explore what that means to be an individual leader a little bit more in this session, because at the end of the day, it's all of us individuals working in open source, and we all have to know how to lead ourselves towards a good positive outcome. So what is leadership? There's a lot of definitions. There's not one specific one, but this is one that I like a lot, which is that leadership is a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal. So it is about influencing, bringing people along in a journey so that they want to do something with you, and achieving something together, something they all want to achieve together. That's ultimately what leadership is. And leadership is sometimes better defined by what it is not. So leadership is not a title. It's not a role. You don't need to be a CEO, VP, whatever title, project lead in order to be a leader. Anyone can lead. It's also not a specific personality type. So you don't need to be really outgoing in order to be a leader. There's lots of introverts who lead as well. It's also important to point out that leadership is not management. Management is about making sure everyone's following policies and process and rules and budgets and things like that. Leadership is different. And it is not about power. It is not about getting people to do things because you have power or authority. It's truly about influence. And there are different kinds of leadership types. There's leading organizations. So in a company, that might be a CEO. In a project, it might be the project lead. Could be an executive director at a foundation for an open source project. And there's leading others. So managers lead others on a team, or product managers work across many teams to build and release a product. In open source, you have someone who might be in charge of all of the forum moderators or the issue queues or the mentors. And then the third one is leading yourself. And this is what the contributor was. This is all of us trying to figure out, how do we achieve something? How do we influence others to help us along the way? Just like the contributor used had the mentor help him along the way. And it's a really important thing to know how to lead yourself, because you really can't lead others or an organization until you can lead yourself. And that's because the more people you're responsible for, or more goals you're responsible for, the more stressful it is. And so if you can't stay calm and give people the calm direction that they need, you're just not going to cut it as a leader. And so because of all of our individual efforts in open source, I'm going to focus a lot today on how to lead yourself. So what do leaders do? So looking at this one contributor, you can see that leaders do many things, and you can see that the contributor did many of these things as well. So you shape a vision, you translate that vision into a clear strategy, you get others to help you achieve it, you focus on a measurable result so you all know when you've achieved it together, and you foster innovation and learning throughout the process. So you're constantly taking insights from all these people you've brought together. And as you're doing this, you're able to lead yourself. You're able to really self-regulate your emotions. And I'll talk some more about that. And the contributor very much did this, had a vision of contributing with a goal of one commit. And the strategy was to go get help. And he recruited a mentor to go do that. And there was a goal. It was one contribution. And he did have a learning mindset, and he was able to do this again and again. And that's what made him be a top contributor. And that's what leaders do. And they need a lot of skills in order to do it. And if you look at this list from some Harvard Business Review research, you can see that the skills required range from inspiring and motivating others, communication, collaboration. You don't really see technical skills. To be a good leader does not mean you need to be a great coder or great mentor. You just need to know how to work with others through influence. And actually, more research shows that 2/3 of leadership depends on emotional intelligence. That's really the skills that you need to be a leader. And so if you want to lead yourself, if you want to lead others, you ultimately need to work on emotional intelligence. And so let's take a look at that. So simply put, emotional intelligence is being able to understand your emotions in a moment, no matter how crazy that moment is, and the effect you have on others, and the ability to understand them and their emotional state and influence them so that you all have a positive outcome together. And Emotional intelligence is a big thing to unpack, and there's many factors that make up emotional intelligence. But the two key ones are self-awareness and self-regulation. Self-awareness is really being in the now, being present, knowing how you're reacting to something. And self-regulation is saying, like, I know how I feel right now. I'm going to adjust to have the best outcome possible. So a great example is you've just had a rough day. You're trying to work with people. Maybe it's through Slack, and something makes you so mad. But you are self-aware. This thing made me mad. And you want to have a positive outcome. So you do what you need to do, you self-regulate, and then you choose a response that gives you a better outcome. Maybe you end up having I'm not sure I understand this. Why don't we go to a video call, talk it through, right? That takes emotional intelligence, and these are the key pillars. And the thing is that if we can all get better at self-awareness, self-regulation, we can really grow our emotional intelligence. And the nice thing is that you can grow emotional intelligence much more than you can even your cognitive skills. And the main way in which you improve emotional intelligence is through mindfulness. And this is really about being present, living in the now. And it's all about calming your nervous system so that your emotions don't hijack your brain and take over and make you send out that nasty email back at someone. When you're calm, you have more access to your logic brain, and you can better assess situations and decide how you're going to respond and how you're going to influence the situation for a better outcome. And this can really include all kinds of approaches. So mindfulness could be meditation, it could be yoga, it could be journaling. And I know Google focuses on this a lot. We have meditation rooms in our buildings back when we used to be able to, use our buildings. And we also have a big initiative called Search Inside Yourself, which I encourage you to check out. And I know for myself and others I talk to, they think, mindfulness sounds pretty hokey. Why would I just sit down and do this to become a better leader? Beyond the reasons I just gave, it's a real change. And I didn't know for myself if I would do it, but I did start a practice. And I certainly found that it helped me move through burnout. I had more efficient thought processes. So if something came up, I was a little bit more strategic because I was just creating more space to think instead of react. I prioritized better. And overall, it just helped me move through some hard situations a lot better. And so I certainly encourage you to look into mindfulness as a way to grow your emotional intelligence and therefore your leadership skills. And, just to help kind of bring it home, I think Tara Brach, she's a Buddhist-based psychologist out of Washington, D.C. here in the U.S. She explains it best with this quote. And it's that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is the opportunity to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And so there's that space that we get to create. And it's mindfulness that allows us to step back and really create that space where we can collect ourselves and have a better response. It's also mindfulness that helps us keep that space ready so that we're not struggling all the time. We're more resilient in the face of any kind of stimulus or conflict that's coming at us all day long. And it's really important that we're resilient and open source. And that's because of the nature of the way we work. We work with online communication and collaboration using GitHub and Slack and Twitter. And our brains are actually not wired for online work. We are designed for face-to-face interaction, reading each other's body cues. It really does trigger the brain in a much different way. And so when we do this online work together, it starts to trigger what's called a disinhibition effect. And there's a couple elements to it, but two that I think are really important to call out are when we have online communication, we have a lack of eye contact. And when we have a lack of eye contact, that reduces empathy for each other. We're just wired to read body language. And emojis, they don't cut it. They just don't help the brain process what's going on. And then the other thing working against us is that when we receive online communication, we almost always project a negative voice to it, or a more negative voice than what the person intended. And it's just really unfortunate, but what we're doing is we're working in an environment where we aren't empathetic, and we're kind of assuming the worst from each other, which is probably why you're hearing all the time that you need to assume positive intent. Like, you just have to be self-aware of these types of things and assume positive intent and choose a better response than just that nasty email back. So we're just being triggered all the time in open source. It does make it hard on many fronts, but if you have emotional intelligence, if you are resilient in this way, you can really do a great job leading yourself through all these kinds of new interactions you're going to have in open source. So, in addition to growing EI, emotional intelligence, with mindfulness, you also need some good strategies that are just ready to go when you encounter some of the interesting interactions you'll have in open source. So that way, if something does trigger you, you reset and then you respond rather than react. And there's a couple pro tips for you on how to do this. So for resetting, you can count to 10 if something's triggered you. You can take some deep clearing breaths. It calms the nervous system. If you're a tea drinker, you can sip hot tea because it takes time to sip tea. You don't want to burn yourself. And actually, the act of taking in the tea is calming to the nervous system. And then last but not least, you can always just take a walk around the block, collect your thoughts, come back to your computer, and decide how you want to respond. And there's a lot of strategies for responding. One way I like to use is yes and. It comes from the improv world, and somebody can say something to you, and maybe you don't necessarily agree, but you can say, yes, I hear you, and here's another approach as well. And what that does is it builds on ideas rather than saying no and cutting that person off and then trying to convince them about your idea. That gets you into more of like a battle of ideas. Another approach is the design approach. I like, I wish, I wonder. So if somebody sends you an idea, you could say, I like this proposal. I wish it had focused a little bit more in this other area that's, interesting to me. And I wonder, if you talk to Sally, if you two might be able to coordinate on filling in that area. Again, it's not about cutting off ideas. It's about designing a conversation and a path forward. Some other things that are important are nonviolent communication skills, really understanding some key techniques for engaging for a positive outcome. And there's books on this, and I highly recommend you check them out. Also using active listening skills. So a lot of times when we're interacting, we're so focused on our ideas and where we want to go next with the conversation. We're not always engaged in truly listening. And the person doesn't always know if they've been heard. So before you take a conversation down a whole nother path, it's really important to use active listening. Asking questions like, well, what I heard you say was this. Is that correct? And then you get aligned on the concepts they were trying to share. And then you can say, yes, that's great. And what about this? And then lastly, when your interactions are going a little south, just ask the person to hop on a video call instead. It's just so much more productive. And at least the video helps with the body language. So these are some pro tips that you can use for kind of leading yourself through really productive interactions in open source. So, we got through a lot pretty quickly. So let me just do a quick recap of everything we've covered so far. You can lead from any position. And to do so, you just need to set a vision for yourself and ask for help. People want to help you. And remember, You can't lead others until you can lead yourself. So focusing on self-leadership is really important. And it's going to take emotional intelligence to be a good leader. And that's going to require you to start a mindfulness practice, because it's through mindfulness that you can grow and strengthen your emotional intelligence. And then finally, as you're engaging with people, being mindful is helpful, but having strategies for engaging with others well is super important. So you want to practice your strategies to reset when something makes you upset. And that way you know how to respond versus react. And I hope that you will use these different techniques, because we really do need more leaders in open source. And we are really excited for you to get more involved and share your skills and talents with all of us. So I hope that you will start being the leader that you need in open source and that we all need. So thank you so much for your time. And if you have any questions, please direct them in chat, or you can always find me on Twitter.